Hi guys, I hope you are enjoying the course so far. I hope you enjoyed looking at literature and American Indian voice. In literature, in this section, we're going to look more specifically at primary source documents and textbook specifically, and what the textbooks offer about the American Indian perspective, and then how we can use primary source documents. And so I wanted to share with you today a journey that started about 7 years ago with, and I have to give credit to these folks, with Glenda McCarthy, Dr. Glenda McCarthy. And she had met a man from Northern Cheyenne and he found out that he was at Alcatraz during the reclamation in 1969. And we got really excited about this, and we knew other folks, but he had some primary source documents that we were really interested in using and building lessons and resources around. So this has been an ongoing process, and this finally was able to get really in a usable format, and now it's being presented as professional development, and then I get to share it here with you in a wider audience today. So I also have to give credit to Cheyenne Aldrich. She's the one that was able to put this together. Yes, I provided the foundation and the backup support, but this is really 99.9% her work that I'm presenting to you today. So shout out to those two people, and then John Robinson, who you're going to see today as well. So honored to consider myself part of this amazing, great group of people and this journey that we've been on together. So you're gonna need a couple things. Make sure you have a phone, because I'm gonna give you some QR codes. This is gonna be a little bit interactive. I'm gonna set my timer here. Apologize for that. So have something to write with, because the stuff that I'm going to have you explore, I'm going to invite you to share them in the next forum. And so maybe be keeping some notes and some ideas on the things that I share with you. And then you'll need your phone, because I'm going to give you a QR code, and I think that covers it. Oh, the proclamation. So you'll need the proclamation because we'll do some work with that. So it is in the same section. So it's above this video. I also have it linked in resources, and it's also available on my Billings Public Schools website. So let's go ahead and get going here, and let's look at the American Indian movement. And the essential question is, how do ordinary people change the world? And this is a question that, really was kind of at the heart of what we felt like was going to bring us to a place of social justice, where students are challenged to write letters. There's a lot of things that overlap when you think about place here, because this is another part of the puzzle, right? Is bringing in the primary source document. Well, sometimes when we don't have access to somebody that can come out to the site, in the case of like Dover, a lot of the knowledge that exists right now is just plants, right? We're just dealing with plants and land conservation, and some restoration in some aspects at Dover Park. But we're part of the community, we're part of the whole, but we supplement that with videos and resources. So I'm going to share how we go about creating some of our own resources that teachers can use. And we actually have quite a bit of stuff that isn't allowed to be shared outside the district. And I think that that's okay, because those people want to keep that stuff private. But the stuff I have for you today is shareable by John Robinson, and he was kind enough to share his time and his resources with us. And so he was one of those people and we're just so lucky, and he's right down the road. And it's just been a great experience for us. So it's kind of how the journey began and where we're going with it. So these are the things that you're going to need. So for the post, you'll have 3 noticings with the New York Times picture. It'll make sense when you get there. And if you miss something, or man, I just really, this one thing really stuck out to me, that's okay. So when you go to post, you know, all these things would be great if that really helps you, but you can also pick or choose or whatever makes sense to you and go the direction that it makes sense to you. But these are the things that I suggest, right? So the New York Times picture, you can see that in the second, three noticing, and I'll talk about how you might do that in your classroom. And then the dice, and then because we're not in a classroom setting right now, the proclamation. So you're gonna do dice with the video, the proclamation, and then you would actually do some group work and talk about who created this proclamation. Why do you think that this document was created? What is the purpose? Who was the intended audience? How can you tell? How would you describe the language and the tone of this proclamation? And so those are what you're going to focus on for the forum that comes next. So this one lesson is part of a larger unit. And when you go to do the assignment at the end of the unit, or are invited to explore some topics, we're not doing part 2 and 3. You're going to kind of do part 2 and 3 on your own. And I just want to reiterate how important it is when you work with students to really experiment with this idea that, okay, I'm going to give you some information that is the perspective from, you know, the American Indian perspective, the Indigenous perspective, and this is who wrote it, and this is why it's credible, and having those conversations with students, because we don't want them just going to the library and typing in American Indian movement without a little bit of understanding where the credible information is going to come from. For all sorts of reasons that exist in the world, information isn't always accurate, and we have to be able to prepare students to be able to extract that information. And so the timeline is a good way to do that. You are the expert in the classroom. You know where those good sources are. You present that source to a student and walk them through the process and your thinking and why it's a good source. And then you have them come back and look at the textbook. You're going to kind of go through that, but you already have some of that information. But I just want you to be thinking about how you would do that. I've included those 2 lesson plans. So this is part of a 3-day analysis where you provide background information, you provide a primary source document, and then you have the students analyze the textbook at the end. So it is really a very nice kind of flow in a 3-day lesson that you can take the skills that you're learning and apply it to any content that is presented in textbooks, right? So our required curriculum and materials that the district provides for us and says, this is what you need to be using to be teaching in your class. We're just going to focus on the occupation or Reclamation of Alcatraz. So you learned and did some key terms at the beginning, and you saw hopefully the difference between occupation and reclamation. And one is not necessarily bad or one is good. We just choose the word reclamation because we didn't feel like this was a military occupation. And so having that conversation with students is important as well. Mind you, this is 11th grade US history. So I'm trying to give you some background information about this very cool topic and very interesting, and so much mileage can be brought from this, and starting in 1969, because so many of us understand or have background knowledge about the civil rights movement, but then might not have an understanding of the American Indian movement. Many Indigenous people, our parents will talk about being involved in AIM. We'll know folks that are involved in AIM, but if you're not necessarily American Indian, you might not necessarily have exposure to that growing up. So it's a great opportunity for us to share this with you as well. So we choose the word, so you're going to see reclamation here moving out. And so you can have that conversation with kids and why the word occupation could be problematic, because this isn't a military takeover, right? This is somewhat of a peace, and we could have greater conversations about what peace means and what violence means, and different approaches to different situations. For example, Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King and their choices and how they decided to deal with things in history. We have those same things that occurred here in Montana as well. Sitting Bull, right? And Crazy Horse and Gall and the leaders of the Northern Cheyenne and the Lakota tribes at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and the choices of Chief Plentycoo with the Crow tribe in becoming scouts for people like Reno and Custer. So the choices that leaders make, and so things and resistance comes in many forms. We choose not to use the word occupation moving forward because we don't feel like this is a violent takeover or military takeover. And man, there's so much that can go with occupation. I'm going to kind of leave it there for you to just think about a little bit. So again, the reclamation, then the timeline comes next, and timeline really does look at the primary source document. We give tools to students to work through the timeline on why it's a credible resource, who wrote it, where does it come from, those kinds of things. And so, and you'll have access, that's what I'm going to have you guys work with, primary source documents at the end and for the assignment as well. And so you're going to do a photo analysis. I don't have permission yet to use this in this course, so I'm linking to it. So what you're going to need to do is use this QR code to access the picture. And I'm going to give you about 2 or 3 minutes to analyze the picture. If you don't know how to do QR code, just pick up your phone, open up the camera. I'm probably going to have to go back and add the, so it will show up on your camera right away, and they'll, in the middle of your screen, it'll say QR.page. You click on that, and then it'll take you, uh-oh, it's not working, guys. Hold on. So I think I got this fixed, guys. So, okay. Hold it up, and it's going to bring up, so camera, hold it up. Don't take a picture like I do. It'll say QR code.de, so you click on that, and it's going to take you to New York Times. The hard part is that if you've accessed too many times, it might, excuse me, it might not bring it up for you. So that's really frustrating as well. What you could do is type in the Google search bar, just open a new tab and type in occupation of Alcatraz, New York Times, and you'll get the photograph. And so we're going to take about 1 to 2 minutes to just notice what you notice in the photograph. And if we were in a classroom, we would, so it's the one, so scroll down in the article, it's the one where the kid is shooting, the guy is shooting a hoop, or shooting hoops in the middle, and then it shows the front of the building, and there's a truck right on the right side. Really, any of those New York Times pictures, they're black and white, are going to be useful. And so in the classroom, when we show this to kids, we just have kids notice what they notice, give them about a minute to think about it. And then we go around the room and we have students try not to repeat what anybody else says. And so I encourage you to do that when you go to share in the forum, just to practice that, where I have to go back to it again and again and again to add something new and dig deeper into the picture. And it takes some time, for kids, and this has to be established from the very beginning of the course, but this is why you don't do something like this on day one, right? You're working with something like this further. This actually falls in our curriculum or scope and sequence in January and February. So it's really great that teachers are learning it this fall. Okay, so 1 to 2 minutes, notice what you notice. If when you go to post, you can dig deeper into the picture and add things that people haven't added before. I know if you're last into the chat or the forum, that's going to be, you got to go back and forth, and you might have to go, but it gives you a chance to look through everybody's other posts. In the classroom, you get to hear and listen to what other people are saying and really pay attention to, and it's kind of exciting for kids because oftentimes you don't find that, especially in a complicated picture like this, you don't necessarily find that people can't find more things. And it's kind of exciting when you're in the room and you're like, oh, nobody said my thing yet. So then go around the room once. I almost wish I could record this. I would have recorded this when Cheyenne did it last week with teachers. Go around the room, and if I get a chance to, I will post it in there later. So we might be able to do that later. So go around the room, noticing, and then go back the other way so that you start on the other side of the room. And then if you can make it through 3 times, or maybe even talk about an action in the picture on the 3rd time around. And so I'm just going to be quiet for here a little bit so you can think about some noticings, and then we'll move on. So hopefully you're thinking about the things that are happening. It's a little bit harder when we don't get to share right away and see. Maybe you can go forward and be able to chat at this point and then come back. But I really encourage you to maybe go in and chat and discuss and see what other people are noticing. But either way, it'll be nice to see it. So then I would also have you do a think, pair, share, right, with your group or with a group around you, and just whatever is happening, whatever you're thinking. And kids usually really relish the opportunity to talk, and you should be able to go around and ask students, what they're learning, why they're learning, and how they're learning it. And so they should be able to say, we're learning about Alcatraz because this was a big part of the civil rights movement. And then we're learning about it through primary source documents. So students should be able to answer all of those questions. That takes some scaffolding as well. But that's a big part of what's happening in culturally responsive practices. So including and diversity with our small groups and our whole groups, and all voices being honored and respected in the sharing in the small group and the sharing in the whole group. So it's a big part of primary sources, is being able to share. So I wanted to make this a little bit more interactive for you as much as possible, as much as can be done. And so this is our critical content, right? Explain how activists of the American Indian movement reclaimed Alcatraz. And so this is where we bring in that conversation with students and start talking about the difference and why we don't call it occupation necessarily. And we're just trying to define our terms and use our terms in really responsible ways, because we know that words can be used to dehumanize or marginalize and disenfranchise people. And so we want to take that out of the classroom as much as possible. And so in the long run, one thing that we might really be looking for is those words in textbook. And so I'll have some tools to really kind of dive deep into the textbook. We have a resource from OPI as well. So the terms again, revisiting those terms. What do they mean? You might do poster, you might do, in the classroom and have these up for the next 3 days. You might do some kind of KWL with these, but just really thinking about these terms. What do they mean? Sometimes we'll do silent discussions about these terms where nobody really says anything. They just write on posters, and then the teacher might go around and say what's on the posters. And there's no crosstalk or responses. We're just listening and observing and thinking. And so those are really important aspects of allowing all the voices to be heard in the classroom. Silent conversations. Kids read and they go to the poster and they just write on the poster, and then the teacher reads everything. No crosstalk. Everybody's just listening and absorbing. It's a really good strategy, especially with the Treaty of Fort Laramie, or if you feel like you have a group of students who might not be as receptive, and we want all perspectives honored. So the next thing that would be super useful is to actually listen to John Robinson. And so Glenda, you're going to see Glenda, and she's sitting down with John. And this is the strategy. So while I'm talking, you want to be writing this down so that while you listen to John, we can be thinking about these things. I was just thinking about my audio. I'm gonna have to turn this off. And hopefully it's good.
Okay, so what did you discover? What was interesting? Anything that confused you? Something that enlightened you? So we're going to watch about the first 10 minutes here.
John Robinson is a tribal court judge.
Okay, I think I got it here.
John Robinson is a tribal court judge for the Northern Cheyenne Nation. And he has some incredible stories from his youth and some great insights to share with us today. So I'm going to start by welcoming you, John. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I'm going to invite you to share with us some stories, starting with some of your experiences in the Reclamation of Alcatraz, which I think was 1969.
Right, November 1969.
Okay.
Maybe I better start just before 1969. In 1968, I was on relocation to Madera, California, and relocation is where they send an Indian down from the reservation to receive training. And the training is never applicable back on the reservation. So the whole idea is to get you a job off the reservation and get you set up where you won't want to go back. After the training at Madera, I made a lot of friends down there from tribes in California, and I made some really good friends from the Tule River Reservation down by Porterville, California. I believe it was on November 19th. We were out cutting wood, and a friend came up and said, "The Indians have taken over Alcatraz." And my first response, of course, was, "What for? What's going on?" And they said, "I don't know. It's like a demonstration." And so we loaded up a pickup and went up there to Alcatraz. We went to what was called Pier 19. That's where it seemed to be the embarkation point for people who wanted to get over to the island. And it was all young people. There was not your older political crew, or these were students, students from the University of California, Los Angeles, and at Berkeley, and at San Francisco State. And my friend said, "Well, we're going back. Let's go." And I said, "No, I want to stay here. You know, it looks pretty interesting." We found out that the only way to get to the island was you had to run a barricade that was set up by the Coast Guard around the island. And there were a few fishermen that were pretty excited about it and had these boats and were helping the Indians get out there. I believe there was only like 70, maybe 79 Indians on the first batch that went out there. By the time I got there, there was probably 200. I got there on the second day, and we pulled in. It was night. Pulled in, and somebody hollered, "Give me your hand." I put my hand out. Somebody grabbed it, and I was on the island. And spent a lot of time meeting folks and going around. It wasn't still quite sure why we were there, but that didn't matter at that time, you know.
Mhm.
But then going around visiting, talking with some of the students, and the excitement that was generated, and the knowledge of these people, these young people who knew their histories, who knew all about the treaties, who knew all about the government policies. Hearing it in a single space there um, was really overwhelming, you know. And I really looked up to these guys. A lot of them was younger than I was, and some were barely older. It was a young crew. And that next, so I walked around. There was the prison itself. There was some buildings. It must have been like guard quarters. Then up on the hill, there was the warden's house. And there was another house up there too. So that night I spent out there on the wharf helping other people onto the island. And the next morning I walked up to the highest peak right up by the warden's house there. And I looked out, and I looked out over the San Francisco Bay. I looked at San Francisco itself, and I looked at what we were standing on. And I guess my thought was, I thought when I was in the mountains that was pure freedom.
Mhm.
I was free to do as I want, chasing those wild horses and living a free life. But there was still a weight on there. It was still under the government. It was still on a reservation. And at that point, what I knew standing there was, this is Indian land. And I felt a sense of freedom at that moment that I have never experienced before. It was as though we were a part of that moving water. We could move in that water. We could move on that land. We could move in the air. We were all a part of it. And that's real freedom. There was no air pushing us down. There was no ground holding us up. There was no streams pushing us one way or another way. We were just all a part of it, you know. And that's real freedom.
So I haven't really experienced him in a while, and he's pretty amazing. So we would share with our groups. I'm gonna pause that. Nope. So our learning target is to recognize how the reclamation of Alcatraz represents American Indian resistance and protest. So the next thing we would do, so we would share dice in small groups, share a whole group, following community protocols and how we might discuss these difficult topics. I love Miranda's information she shares about sharing and working with difficult topics. Again, I can't reiterate enough that these things we don't do on day one necessarily. We start out with lighter topics at the beginning and just establishing a community of trust and understanding, and that when we get to the difficult stuff, it's okay to disagree, but we have to be respectful and mindful of each other. And so the next thing that is I would task you with doing is to read the proclamation, and this is the newsletter that John shared with us. I think it belongs in the National Archives. I think that might be my next little adventure with this project that we've had for so long, is to maybe see if John would allow us to maybe submit it to the archives for him, or even the Library of Congress. And so the stories and this story itself is really important. Hopefully you're making some connections with place and culture. One of the things that always really stands out to me is that this is Indian land. It's not was or will be, or it has become, it is, you know, it's at this very moment in time. And so if you go to the proclamation, it's linked in the page there on the hub course. And I can link it in here as well in the slideshow as well, so that you have access to it on the slideshow. And you read that first page. Read the source together, circle unfamiliar words as you listen. After we read aloud, be prepared to share those words with the class. So I like reading some of this stuff aloud. We don't do popcorn read or anything like that. It's somebody that wants to read it aloud. And we've established protocols that, you know, of just being respectful and honest and caring to the words that you're using and saying out loud. But that's an important task for students as well in voice. Read silently and note any specific words or phrases that jump out to you. And the first read through is really to, you know, establish those words. If it is a sensitive document like this one is, you might choose to read that aloud yourself and talk about the words that are in there, like why is the word white used, and have a conversation about the word white being the English interpretation of Indigenous languages and a description of people that were not the same as the Indigenous people. That's an English word, not an Indigenous word. So the Indigenous words would be different. You could do a deep dive into that as well. But staying on topic, you know, just really making sure students have a good understanding of the words that are in the proclamation. And then, you know, read through and strange, confusing, funny, troubling, difficult, and be prepared to share some of these with the class. And so then, who created this proclamation? Why do you think that this document was created? What is its purpose? Who was the intended audience? How can you tell? How would you describe the language and the tone of this proclamation? So we aren't, you notice we aren't talking about what, why, when, where, or how. We're just looking at, you know, we're not discussing the morality of this occupation, or should they be doing this or should they not be doing this. We're not discussing that. What we're discussing is what is actually happening, you know, transporting ourselves to this point in time in what these people are experiencing. And we know this because we have a video, we have a New York Times picture, and now we have this proclamation that was made by the Indians of all tribes, is the groups that they called themselves. So, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. So just thinking about these questions, again, you're going to post this as the forum. And so then we might lead students in a discussion about, was the reclamation successful? And for time reasons, I'm not going to have you watch this. It is, the slideshow again is linked. We have permission to use this. You can use this in your classrooms. The slideshow is in there. The lesson plan is in there as well, that has the essential understandings and the standards for US history. I used this in US government when I taught seniors. I've used some of the information in psychology. And so deep stuff as far as the content goes might not be something that you would use in a sixth grade class. I mean, obviously we have US 8, but it doesn't fit up to that. You would be talking about other activism, not this particular event in history. But the background knowledge for you, I think is really powerful because you're listening to and hearing these voices as well. So this is a really interesting kind of deep dive you can do in history. Again, it's more content specific to history. If you want to deep dive into it, I would encourage you to create another primary source for you to work with. And then this is just kind of a reflection that Cheyenne really likes to do. And I shout out to this because I love this so much. Just as reflections, we ask kids to reflect of it often. And sometimes we might not give them a guide to go by. And this is something that I've used in my stuff as well. And I just think it's beautiful. The head, the heart, and the conscious. So, or the conscience. And so, you know, your civic agency. What information have you learned? What additional information would you like to have to help your students understand the event better? What emotions does this event raise for you? What emotions can you anticipate for students? So I think that these are really good reflection pieces for you as a learner, but then thinking about how this can be brought up in your class in responsible and effective ways. What questions about fairness, equality, and justice does this event raise for you? How can you help your students wrestle with these challenges? And then again, Miranda is going to give you more information on tackling difficult topics. So that'll be great. It'll fit in perfect. So there is some extensions. We talked about using this in art or math class as well, and looking at the Treaty of Fort Laramie, the first one, and how I think that's what John said, that's where Alcatraz is on that first treaty, which is so interesting to think about. And we refer to the treaty so much here, but then all the way over in California and that knowledge. But area and ratios and any of those kinds of things that we can look at and then bring in the historical context for math is always useful. US history, you know, pretty intense. And she's got some information. And when we were looking really deep into this, the FBI's involvement, there's another book, Killers of the Flower Moon, might be something that you're interested in that would be beneficial to understand and learn more about the FBI. And then Standing Rock and Dapple, and then a connection with Ben Pease as well, because Ben Pease has a lot of information about Standing Rock and his experiences there as well. We've had to get probably like Christian Parish in a video as well. And so it's something that we're working for to try to bring more information on those two topics. And Water Protectors, that's a book that we use in our elementary grades that we have lesson plans on our website for as well. And I'll try to link those as well. Human rights organization. So Leonard Peltier, if you are not aware of the situation, his incarceration and the continued incarceration of him is a really interesting case in United States history. And then art, the occupation of Alcatraz and those, and really looking at perspective. And so I think that is all that we have for you right now. So go forth and post and let us know if you have any questions. And I hope you enjoyed our little deep dive into Alcatraz and primary source documents. So what you are going to be doing and challenged with is finding that information in textbooks and then finding supplemental information that you would use. If I had the textbook, our US history textbook, I would show you, which actually does a pretty decent job of talking about AIM and its birth and then the occupation and events during the civil rights movement. And we feel like it's a pretty responsible perspective. But that isn't always the case with everything that's in our history textbook. And so we use this as a way to help kids understand. We have very specifically 2 words that are used. The title says, and you'll see this when you go through the textbook analysis. So in the textbook at one point, it says the Battle of Wounded Knee. And the information underneath the title actually describes a massacre. But we want kids to be able to look at that and ask questions and still continue to have questions on why the information is being presented the way that it is And then where do we find additional sources of information, and who is providing those sources, and what are sources that are going to be credible and accurate, and authorized, that can supplement Wounded Knee so that students can have a better understanding of the events. And so those are the things. So AIM does a really good job in our textbook, Wounded Knee, and what was happening with the violation of the treaties is not done very well. And so we want teachers and students as much as possible to be able to go in and analyze those sources with a critical eye. And who is this for? Who is this about? Who's writing this? Who's left out of the story? I even will go so far as say, who does this help? And who does this hurt, right? And what's the message? And we want students to be thinking about those things. And so hopefully you have some tools. Once you kind of apply this information in the assignment, you'll have some tools that you can use to analyze primary source documents. Again, let us know if you have any questions. Thanks, and good luck with everything. Thank you.